In the heart of Rome, under the scorching heat of the sun and the cries of a frenzied crowd, there stood a place as large as it was feared, the Colosseum. An amphitheater where life and death were not just part of the spectacle, but the spectacle itself. Today, we know it as a monument that astonishes with its grandeur. But for centuries, the Colosseum was much more than that. It was the center of brutality that defied human norms, a place where glory and blood mixed as if they were one. The practices that occurred within its walls seem unimaginable today, even terrifying. But in the mindset of the Romans, these were necessary, a means to impose order, to glorify an empire that was believed to be eternal, and to keep their people entertained through suffering. In this video, you will discover 7 of the most chilling practices that took place in the Colosseum Arena. Real events, documented by the historians of the time, that tell us how Rome transformed violence into art. These are not easy stories to digest, but it is precisely for that reason that we must tell them. Because, only by understanding the dark side of a civilization can we see what is truly fascinating in its complexity. And what we reveal today might make you rethink everything you thought you knew about Rome. Don't go away, the best is yet to come. The Damnatio ad Bestias was one of the most feared forms of execution in the Colosseum. A brutal ritual that consisted of throwing the condemned into the arena, stripped of weapons, protection, and any hope of survival. Before them, waited the wildest beasts the empire could gather, lions, tigers, bears, even elephants and rhinoceroses brought from the farthest corners of Rome. The scene was terrifying. The animals, released with fury, pounced on their victims, while tens of thousands of spectators watched the spectacle with a mixture of horror and fascination. But for the Romans, this was not just an act of cruelty, but a symbol of imperial power, a reminder of the strength of the law. The public death of a condemned person represented the justice that fell upon those who defied the established order. The condemned were not just criminals, they were rebels, prisoners of war, and in times of persecution, even Christians. Each death fed the sands of the arena, and in the minds of the Romans, it sent a clear message: disobedience to the power of Rome was paid for with blood. And while the people delighted in the spectacle, what was truly being reinforced was the image of an invincible empire. When the sun reached its highest point, the Colosseum didn't just take a break, it prepared for the harshest part of the day. It was time for the midday pause, the rest for the Roman people, but also for execution. While some spectators took the opportunity to have lunch, others remained in their seats, eager to witness the most direct spectacle, death in its most real form. During this break, prisoners, slaves, and enemies of the state were brought into the arena, where their fate was already sealed. Some were crucified, others fought each other in unarmed combat, or were even burned alive. These executions were not acts of senseless sadism, but a form of public lesson, a representation of the imminent punishment that would fall upon those who opposed Rome. It was a pedagogy of fear, where the visible pain of the victims acted as a tool to maintain order and reinforce the empire's authority. Through these public executions, Rome taught that there was no place for disobedience. The Roman people learned, through screams and applause, that justice could only be achieved through violence. In the Colosseum, they didn't just fight for survival, but they also reenacted ancient myths with unparalleled brutality. The legends of Orpheus, Hercules, and Pasiphae came to life, but not in the way actors interpret them on a stage. In Rome, myths were represented with real victims, prisoners condemned to death. One of the most chilling accounts comes from the poet Martial. A man, disguised as Orpheus, surrounded by calm animals, played his lyre. Suddenly, a wild bear was unleashed, tearing him apart before the eyes of the audience. It was not just a spectacle, it was a live tragedy, a reflection of the brutality of an empire that merged art with suffering. In another myth, a criminal was forced to dress as Hercules, only to be burned alive on a pyre, representing his tragic end. But perhaps the most disturbing representation was of a woman condemned to portray Pasiphae, placed in a structure shaped like a cow. Before the eyes of the public, it was suggested that a bull mounted her, recreating the beastly union from the myth. We don't know if it was real or simulated, but the mere thought of it leaves a deep mark. These representations were, in a way, sophisticated. The Romans saw them as a blend of art and punishment, a way to bring their legends to life, but at a human cost. When we think of the Colosseum, we think of gladiators, armed men who fought to the death under the roar of the crowd. But beyond the heroism attributed to them, gladiator fights were an act of institutionalized violence. Some were slaves, others prisoners of war, and a few were volunteers seeking fame and fortune. They all shared one fate, risking their lives for entertainment. The fights were organized, regulated, but sometimes, there was no room for surrender. The fight had to end with only one man standing. If the loser fell, his fate depended on the thumb of the public and the judgment of the editor of the game. In the grand spectacles organized by emperors like Trajan, thousands of combats were recorded in just a few months. Although some gladiators were admired and respected, the majority were sacrificed as part of the routine. The arena of the Colosseum was their field of glory, but also their tomb. While the spectators cheered, they bled, fighting for a cause that was not their own. But the Colosseum was not only a witness to land battles, but also naval ones. On special occasions, like the inaugural games, the amphitheater would literally be filled with water. Thanks to complex hydraulic systems, the arena was flooded, turning into a sea of blood and chaos. Two improvised fleets, formed by condemned prisoners, would face each other in choreographed battles that ended in a massacre. Cassius Dio recounts how, during one of these performances, 3,000 men were forced to fight until only one survivor remained. It was said that before setting sail, they all shouted to the emperor, "Hail Caesar, those who are about to die salute you." It was a spectacle of awe and death, as the audience watched a fictitious war with very real consequences, bodies floating, muffled screams, blood staining the water. Although the Naumachia were not common due to the complexity of the preparations, when they occurred, they left a deep impact on all those present. It was Rome showing that it not only dominated the land, but also death, even in water. In the mornings at the Colosseum, before executions and combats, the Venationes were held, hunting spectacles where exotic animals were released into the arena. But it wasn't just a game. It was a true public slaughter, a spectacle of death for the delight of the Roman people. Lions from North Africa, elephants from India, bears from Germania, rhinoceroses, ostriches, and even hippopotamuses were brought from the farthest corners of the empire. The animals were released to fight each other or against expert hunters called Bestiarii, who fought with spears or arrows. In a single day, thousands of creatures were sacrificed. For example, during the inaugural games at the Colosseum, more than 5,000 animals were sacrificed in a single day. The magnitude of these slaughters was such that some species began to disappear from their natural habitats. But for the Romans, these hunts were a symbol of man's domination over nature, a display of imperial power. It was a visual luxury, a spectacle that showcased the splendor of Rome. However, behind all that awe, there was death. A lot of death. If there was one emperor who took the Colosseum to the limit of egocentrism and brutality, it was Commodus. Unlike other rulers who watched the games from the royal box, Commodus ventured into the arena, dressed as Hercules, with a club in hand, participating in simulated battles and animal hunts. Commodus was not satisfied with just being a spectator. He sought personal glory, the fame that came from the shouts of the crowd. He actively participated in the combats, and the most disturbing part was that many of his victims were not trained gladiators, but vulnerable people, wounded soldiers, criminals, defenseless men. He forced them to dress as mythological monsters, and he would kill them with his fists, showing his power, while parading around the arena, demanding applause from the crowd. In a single day, Commodus boasted of killing 100 lions. He also hunted ostriches, giraffes, and elephants. But he did so with an arrogant show, walking among the fallen bodies, displaying the corpses, and taking fortunes from the imperial treasury for each feat. For many Romans, it was no longer a spectacle, it was a humiliation. But no one dared stop him. The Colosseum, which had already been a symbol of power, became a mirror of a bloodthirsty tyranny. The Colosseum, with its grandeur and brutality, was not just a place for executions and combat. It witnessed an era where life and death were part of the same spectacle, a stage where imperial power was manifested in every blow, every scream, every fall. Through the centuries, the Colosseum has stood the test of time, not just as a monument, but as a reminder of the excesses of a civilization that left an indelible mark on history. Today, we face the complexity of that era, not judging, but understanding the shadows of the past to appreciate Rome's impact on the world. What the Romans experienced in the Colosseum cannot be ignored. Every moment of violence, every bloody spectacle, shows us a culture that understood power as something absolute, something that had to be demonstrated, reaffirmed, even at the cost of life itself. The Colosseum became an eternal witness to a civilization that marked history. And as we look at this monument today, we ask ourselves, how did we come to this point? But more importantly, what lessons does this part of history leave us?